All right, welcome to lesson 3.5 on fusion. So your notes should be organized something like this page. It's fairly short, and then maybe add some practice problems later on. All right, so in the previous lesson, we talked about how we draw different elements. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how these elements are created. So all of these elements, like in the video that we just showed, are created through the process of fusion. So fusion is basically combining of nuclei to form a bigger or heavier nucleus or a new element. So what does that mean? Well, let's say I have two different elements here. Actually, they're the same. They're both hydrogen, and the only thing different about them is that this one has an extra neutron, and we'll talk about why in lesson 3.6. Right? So if I have two hydrogen nucleuses or nuclei, plural for nucleus, right? So I have two of these things, they crash in together, they release tons of energy and light. And when these atoms crash into each other, they form one new element, helium, right? So let's talk about how we know that helium is the thing that gets created. Well, notice here that helium has two protons, and before each hydrogen had one proton. So these two crash together. So now 1 plus 1 gives me 2. So I know that I have two protons in this element, right? And I also might notice that, hey, this one had an extra neutron, and now it's part of this one thing, right? So if I count the mass, I have one neutron, two protons. And remember that our mass is the protons plus the neutrons together. So my mass is going to be 3, right? So I know that I have an element with two protons with a mass of 3. At this point, I would need my periodic table to help me figure out what element this is. So if you go to ptable.com, you'll see a website like this, and you'll notice that all the top numbers represents our atomic number. So for hydrogen, it's 1. If you can't see, you can click on the elements and it'll show you a larger version here on your upper left corner. Right? So hydrogen has 1 proton, helium has 2 protons, Li or lithium has 3, Be has 4, so on and so forth. So thinking back to our problem, we made something with 2 protons, right? So therefore, 2 protons, looking at the top number, helium or He is what I made, right? So here, if I asked you, okay, if you have 2 protons, what element did you make? Well, you made helium because the number of protons will tell you the element type. Right. So if you did not know this before, I would add this to your notes. And your notes might end up looking something like this. Right. A side note or something you should know is that the process of fusion, when you're making new elements, generates a lot of energy. And it happens in the sun, which is an example of a type of star, right? And the process of fusion forms new elements. Right? So let's do some practice problems with fusion. You might notice that these are the same problems we did in class. So if you totally understand what we did in class, feel free to skip this to move on to lesson 3.6. If not, this is a slowed down version of everything that happened, right? So the next couple of slides will show two elements that will collide and combine, right? Kind of like in our notes. And your job is to tell me, what element did we make, right? And something that will help you is leaving ptable.com open on a separate tab. Okay, starting with this first one. So a reminder that because we're doing fusion, we're only going to focus on the nucleus or the center of the atom. And mainly we just need to know that this top number is how many protons you have, right? As an aside, know that this is also the number for electrons in a neutral atom, but I'm not going to write that down because it's not super important for fusion. So down here, remember that our number on the bottom is the atomic mass, right? And this is the number of protons. I should actually do this in blue. Plus our number of neutrons. Let me pick a different color for neutrons, right? So here, it's kind of like what we just did in our notes, right? So if I think about how many protons I have 2 on top of helium, 2 on top of lithium. If they crash into each other to form one thing, I will end up with 5 protons because 2 plus 3 equals 5. So I'm treating this top row as something I'm adding together, right? What will the mass of this atom be? Well, let's add up the bottom numbers and see what we get. All right, so 4 plus 7 is going to be 11. All right, so whatever this new element I made has 5 protons and a mass of 11. All right, so therefore, on my periodic table, I'm going to look for an element with 5 protons, or the atomic number of 5. So up here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's my 5th one. So the elements with 5 protons we call boron, symbolized by the capital letter B. Right? So this element is going to be boron. Right? How did I know that? Because it has 5 protons. Right? Symbolized by this top number, 5. Let's try another one. All right, so for this element, see if you can tell me how many protons it has and what would the mass of this one be? Okay, so hopefully you might have recognized that 16 plus 1 will give you 17, right? And if I wanted to know the mass is going to be 32 plus 1, which is 33, right? To figure out what element this is, I need to look for elements number 17 on my periodic table, right? So looking at the periodic table, element number 17 is Cl, or chlorine, because my top number, known as the atomic number, is chlorine. Right, so therefore, this element is going to be chlorine. All right, so go ahead and pause this video. See if you can do this one, and unpause when you're ready. All right, so this one's going to be 7 plus 8, so that's going to give me an atomic number of 15, or 15 protons. My bottom number is going to be 14 plus 16, so that's going to be a mass of 30. I'm going to use this top number and check my periodic table to figure out what element I have. So 15, top number 15 is going to be P, or phosphorus. Right, so this one's going to be phosphorus. Or P. You can just write the symbol for short either way. Okay, so what if I ask you something like this? I can make oxygen, but here I'm starting with boron. So boron needs to combine with what to make oxygen? Well, at this point, it's a tiny bit trickier, but it's not too bad. It's the same idea, right? So 5 plus what will equal 8, right? So I can focus on the top number. 5 plus what will equal 8. You might be able to automatically think and be like, oh, 5 plus 3 is 8, right? Or if you subtract the 2, right, 8 minus 5 will give you 3 protons. So the way I got to this equation is I have 5 plus something will give me 8, right? So if I want to figure out what this variable is, if you recall in math class, we don't put a question mark there. We kind of just put a letter in place of the question mark, right? So we might call it x. So 5 plus x equals 8. So if I want to solve for x, I just need to think to myself, oh, I want to get x by itself. So minus 5 on both sides. So I get 3. So therefore, x equals 3, right? This is the same thing as doing 8 minus 5. Or if I look at this way, 5 plus what equals 8, right? Think of the arrow as an equal sign. 5 plus 3 will equal 8. So here, the element I don't know has 3 protons. Right, what about down here for the mass? It's the same idea, yeah? So 11 plus what equals 16? Right, 11 plus what equals 16? Well, if you think about it, or you can subtract, right? 11 plus 5 will equal 16. Or you might think about it as 16 minus 11 equals 5, right? So I know that whatever this element is going to have 3 protons and its mass is 5. But mainly what I need to know is that it has 3 protons. Then I can check my periodic table. What's element number 3? Well, element number 3 is Li, or lithium, because top number is 3. Right, so here I have Li, or lithium. Right. This would be lithium. Okay. So here's a tricky one. All right, so let's say I want to make neon. It has 10 protons, right? So there are a couple of possible correct answers that I can think of right now. Because if I think about what plus what equals 10, well, there's lots of numbers that add up to 10. I can think of 5 plus 5 equals 10. I can also say that 2 plus 8 equals 10. So all my elements can be different, right? So if I have 2 protons, looking at the periodic table, this is going to be helium, right? My top number is 2, He. So this is going to be helium. If I add helium with 8 protons, which one has 8 protons? This one has a top number of 8, so 8 protons is oxygen, or O. Helium plus oxygen will give me neon, right? 5 plus 5, what's element number 5? 5 is boron, right? So top number is 5. So boron plus boron will also give me neon. What will the mass be? Well, the mass is dependent from our periodic table, right? So for the first one, we used He, helium. So this number is a decimal. I'm going to round it to the nearest whole number. So that's just going to be 4, right? So our mass for this helium is going to be 4. Oxygen, if I check my periodic table and round to the nearest whole number, oxygen is here. 15.9. 9 is greater. 9 is greater than 5, so I'm going to round up to 16. Right, so this is going to be 16 for the 16 for the mass. There we go. So 16 for this mass. 4 plus 16 is going to be 20. So this first one, if I crash helium with oxygen, I'm going to end up with neon, right? If I crash boron and boron, I'm also going to end up with neon. So this is essentially how fusion works. See if you can do a couple of the problems on your own in the quiz part.